If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, what impact will it have on the entire world, and which country will be affected the most? First, let's understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. It is a small area of just 33 kilometers located between Iran, Oman, and the UAE. It is a narrow sea passage through which almost 20% of the world's oil supply flows, nearly 70 million barrels every day. This oil comes from 8 countries located in the Persian Gulf, including Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. For the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar, 90% of their oil exports pass through this narrow route to reach the rest of the world. If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, following countries will suffer the most damage. First is India, because it imports 85% of its oil, and 60% of that comes from Middle Eastern countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. Fuel prices in India would skyrocket, and as a result, everything related to oil and all industries would face severe disruption. Industries could shut down, there would be job losses, and the economy would be severely affected. The second most affected country would be China. China is the world's largest oil importer, bringing in 10 million barrels of oil every day. 40% of China's oil imports pass through this Strait of Hormuz. Although China has built oil pipelines with Russia and Central Asia, they don't even fulfill 20% of its energy needs. So, if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, China's economy could suffer a massive blow, and if China's economy is shaken, its effects will be felt all over the world. The third most affected country would be Japan, as it imports 90% of its oil, and 75% of that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The fourth most affected country would be Saudi Arabia. 80 to 90% of Saudi Arabia's oil goes to the rest of the world through Strait of Hormuz, while only 10% goes to Europe via its Red Sea coastline. So if this choke point is blocked, Saudi Arabia's economy will be heavily impacted. Imagine that a country suddenly loses 80 to 90% of its revenue. What would happen to it? Something similar could happen to Saudi Arabia. There's also a high chance that Saudi Arabia might send in its military to reopen the route, and that could make the situation even worse. Fifth is Pakistan, which gets about 90% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. This oil meets around 27% of the country's energy needs. So if the route is blocked, prices in Pakistan could rise sharply, but there's an interesting twist. Since Pakistan shares a border with Iran, several government reports suggest that 35% of Pakistan's diesel comes unofficially from Iran. So if the strait is blocked, Pakistan might turn to Iran for oil, either quietly or through an official deal. Next in line is the UAE, because as nearly 72% of its oil exports rely on this Strait of Hormuz, the country does have a backup option, the Habshan Fujairah pipeline, which allows it to bypass the strait and export up to 60% of its oil. But for a major economy like the UAE, losing the remaining 40% would still be a serious blow. Next comes the European countries like France, Germany, and Italy, which on average get 10% of their oil through the Strait of Hormuz. A blockade here would hit them hard as well. Globally, experts warn that oil prices could soar past $150 a barrel, causing widespread inflation and possibly triggering a major global recession. So this small 33-kilometer area holds enough power to shake the entire world.
Welcome to the channel, where we break down the biggest stories shaping our world, from global politics to economic shocks. If you want the truth behind the headlines, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
Iran's president is apologizing for attacks on neighboring countries, but they're still launching missiles and drones at those Gulf nations. Some strikes hitting oil fields, which is now causing prices to spike for consumers here in the U.S. ABC's Marcus Moore reports from Qatar tonight.
Tonight, oil fields on fire from Iraq to Tehran, fueling growing concerns over the rising price of oil. Oil is now approaching $100 a barrel and climbing fast, already impacting Americans. Prices at the pump rising nearly 50 cents a gallon in a week. Jet fuel prices soaring even faster. On February 27th, the average price of jet fuel was $2.50 per gallon, compared to $3.95 per gallon on Thursday, according to the Argus U.S. Jet Fuel Index. Kuwait and the UAE already limiting oil production, and Qatar taking the extraordinary step of pausing its liquefied natural gas production days after Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. And traffic remains disrupted in the strait, where 20% of the world's gas supply passes through. The White House trying to calm fears, announcing a $20 billion reinsurance program for oil tankers and other maritime traffic. Companies worried about the risk to their ships, crew, and cargo. Even after Iran apologized for striking their Gulf neighbors, those nations still on defense tonight. And trillions of dollars of investments in the U.S. may be at stake amid concerns about the region. A leading Emirati businessman lashing out at President Trump on X, writing, quote, Who gave you the authority to drag our region into a war with Iran? And on what basis did you make this dangerous decision? And there is reportedly anger in the government of some Gulf states that they were not given more warning ahead of the retaliation from Iran that has rained down on their countries.
In just 1 week, the conflict between the United States and Iran is already sending shockwaves across the world. Oil prices are surging, gas prices are climbing at the pump, and the Middle East may be on the edge of a much larger war. Tonight, we break down what is happening, what the White House is saying, and why this conflict could reshape the global economy. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for the latest updates on global events and breaking geopolitical news. The war enters its first week. The conflict involving the United States and Iran has now reached its first full week, and serious questions are emerging about the true objectives of the mission. President Donald Trump recently made headlines after calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. But what exactly does that mean? White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt explained that the war will only end when Iran no longer poses a threat to the United States and when the military goals of the operation are fully achieved. In simple terms, the administration is signaling that the conflict may continue until Iran's military capabilities are severely weakened. And that raises an important question. How long could this war actually last? Oil prices are exploding. While the war unfolds overseas, the economic impact is already hitting global markets. Oil prices have surged dramatically. U.S. crude oil is now trading above $90 per barrel, marking a 35% increase in just 1 week. That is the largest weekly surge since oil futures trading began in 1983. Experts say the reason for this spike is simple: uncertainty. The Middle East remains one of the most critical energy regions on Earth, especially the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway. If the conflict disrupts shipping in that region, oil prices could climb even higher. Americans feeling it at the pump, and the impact is already being felt by millions of drivers. Gas prices in the United States have jumped 34 cents per gallon since the war began. Economists say fuel prices are one of the most visible economic indicators for everyday people. Unlike stock markets or economic reports, drivers see the price of gas every time they fill their tanks. That means rising fuel costs can quickly change public sentiment about the economy. And with elections approaching, the White House knows this could become a major political issue. The U.S. economy faces new pressure. At the same time, new economic data suggests the U.S. job market may be slowing down. Recent reports show that only about 126,000 new jobs were created, while earlier numbers were revised downward. Economists say several factors are now putting pressure on the economy: rising energy prices, global uncertainty from war, and shifting trade policies. If energy prices continue rising, it could trigger another wave of inflation, affecting everything from transportation to food prices. Civilian casualties under investigation. The conflict has also raised serious humanitarian concerns. Iranian officials claim that a strike on a school in southern Iran killed more than 160 people. The U.S. Department of Defense has confirmed that it is investigating whether American forces were responsible for the strike. If confirmed, the incident could increase international criticism and diplomatic pressure surrounding the war. The conflict expands to Lebanon. Meanwhile, the situation across the region is becoming even more dangerous. Israel has launched a wave of attacks targeting positions linked to Hezbollah in Beirut. Entire neighborhoods have been evacuated as airstrikes intensify. Officials say nearly 500,000 people have now been displaced in Lebanon. Israel says its goal is to weaken Hezbollah and prevent attacks along its northern border. But analysts warn this could open a second front in the war, dramatically increasing the risk of regional escalation. Defense industry ramps up production. Back in Washington, the administration is preparing for the possibility that this conflict may last longer than expected. The White House has met with major defense contractors, asking them to increase the production of advanced weapons. Some companies have agreed to quadruple their output, and new manufacturing facilities may be built to expand the supply chain. Officials say the United States currently has enough weapons for the conflict, but they want to ensure stockpiles remain strong if the war continues. A region on edge. Right now, the biggest concern among analysts is that the conflict could spread beyond Iran. If additional countries or armed groups become involved, the Middle East could face a much wider regional war. And if oil supplies are disrupted, the consequences could ripple across the entire global economy. For now, world leaders are watching closely, hoping the situation does not spiral further out of control. Ending. The war between the United States and Iran is still in its early stages, but its consequences are already being felt across the world. Rising energy prices, growing humanitarian concerns, and expanding military operations suggest this crisis may only be beginning, and the coming weeks could determine whether this remains a limited conflict or grows into something much larger. How this conflict could reshape the Middle East. Opening transition. As the war between the United States and Iran enters its second week, the consequences are spreading far beyond the battlefield. Oil markets are shaking. Entire cities are preparing for conflict. And millions of people across the Middle East are bracing for what could become the most dangerous regional crisis in years. While the initial strike shocked the world, analysts now believe the real question is not how the war started, but how far it might spread. To understand what could happen next, we need to look at the region itself, a complex network of alliances, rivalries, and military forces that have been building tension for decades. The strategic importance of the Middle East. The Middle East is not just another region of the world. It is one of the most strategically important areas on the planet. For decades, global powers have paid close attention to the region because it sits at the center of global energy supply routes, trade corridors, and geopolitical influence. A huge portion of the world's oil production comes from countries in this region. But even more importantly, much of that oil travels through a narrow maritime passage known as the Strait of Hormuz. This waterway connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean and allows oil tankers to deliver energy supplies to markets across Asia, Europe, and North America. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide, yet nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. That makes it one of the most critical choke points in the global economy. If military conflict disrupts shipping there, the impact would not just affect the Middle East, it would ripple across the entire global energy system. Why Iran matters in the energy equation. Iran sits directly along the northern coast of the Strait of Hormuz. Because of this geographic position, Iran has long held the ability to threaten or disrupt shipping traffic through the strait during times of conflict. For years, Iranian military leaders have warned that if Iran were attacked or economically strangled by sanctions, they could block or interfere with oil shipments moving through the area. Even a temporary disruption could send global oil prices skyrocketing. That is why markets reacted so quickly when news of the war broke. Traders and investors immediately began calculating the risks of supply disruptions, and those fears pushed oil prices sharply upward in a matter of days. Global markets react. Energy markets are extremely sensitive to geopolitical shocks. Even rumors of instability can trigger price swings. But when actual military conflict occurs in an energy-producing region, the reaction can be dramatic. That is exactly what happened after the first week of the conflict. Oil prices surged to levels not seen in years. Financial analysts say the rapid increase reflects uncertainty about how long the conflict might last. Markets hate uncertainty. When investors cannot predict what will happen next, they begin pricing in worst-case scenarios. In this case, the worst-case scenario involves major disruptions to oil production or shipping in the Persian Gulf. If that happens, energy costs around the world could rise dramatically. The domino effect on the global economy. Rising oil prices do not just affect drivers at the gas pump. They affect nearly every part of the global economy. Transportation companies rely heavily on fuel. Airlines, cargo ships, trucking companies, and delivery services all face higher costs when oil prices climb. Those costs are usually passed down to consumers. That means the price of food, clothing, electronics, and everyday goods can increase as well. Energy is the backbone of modern economies. When energy becomes more expensive, almost everything else does too. This is why economists are watching the conflict so closely. If oil prices remain elevated for an extended period of time, inflation could increase again across multiple countries. The role of Israel. Another major factor in this conflict is the role of Israel. Israel has long viewed Iran as one of its most serious security threats. Iran has supported armed groups across the region that oppose Israel, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and other militant organizations. Because of this, tensions between Israel and Iran have been simmering for years. Now, with the United States involved in direct conflict with Iran, Israel's role becomes even more significant. In recent days, Israeli forces have launched strikes against targets connected to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli leaders say these operations are designed to prevent attacks on their northern border, but critics worry that the situation could spiral into a wider regional confrontation. Hezbollah and the risk of a second front. Hezbollah is one of the most powerful armed groups in the Middle East. Based in Lebanon, the organization has built a large arsenal of rockets and missiles over the years. Some estimates suggest Hezbollah possesses tens of thousands of projectiles capable of reaching deep into Israeli territory. If Hezbollah fully enters the conflict, Israel could face attacks on a much larger scale. That would dramatically expand the scope of the war. Instead of a conflict focused mainly on Iran and U.S. forces, the war could evolve into a multi-front regional crisis. Military analysts say this scenario is one of the biggest concerns right now. Lebanon's fragile situation. Lebanon is already facing severe economic and political challenges. Years of financial instability, political gridlock, and infrastructure problems have pushed the country to the brink of collapse. Now, with airstrikes and military tensions increasing, many Lebanese citizens fear they could be dragged into another devastating conflict. Reports indicate that hundreds of thousands of people have already been displaced from areas near military targets. Families are fleeing their homes with whatever belongings they can carry. Some are sleeping in temporary shelters, while others are staying with relatives or friends. The humanitarian situation could become far worse if the fighting intensifies. Humanitarian concerns grow. War always carries a heavy human cost. Beyond the military objectives and political strategies, ordinary people are often the ones who suffer the most. Schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods can become dangerous places when conflict erupts. Reports of civilian casualties have already begun emerging from different parts of the region. International organizations are calling for investigations into incidents where civilian infrastructure may have been damaged. These situations can quickly become major international controversies. When civilian casualties occur, diplomatic tensions often rise, and pressure grows on governments to explain or justify their actions. The role of the United States. For the United States, the conflict represents both a military and political challenge. American leaders must balance several competing goals. On one hand, they want to weaken Iran's ability to threaten U.S. interests and allies in the region. On the other hand, they want to avoid a prolonged war that could drain resources and destabilize the global economy. Military planners are carefully evaluating every step of the operation. Large-scale conflicts in the Middle East have historically proven difficult to resolve quickly. That is why many analysts believe the next few weeks will be critical. If diplomatic channels open, the situation could stabilize. But if military escalation continues, the conflict could expand in unpredictable ways. A region waiting for what comes next. Across the Middle East, governments and citizens alike are watching events unfold with concern. Some countries are quietly preparing for possible economic disruptions. Others are strengthening security measures in case the conflict spreads. Diplomatic leaders are also attempting to keep communication channels open in hopes of preventing further escalation. But the reality is that wars rarely follow predictable paths. Even small incidents can trigger larger reactions. And when multiple countries and armed groups are involved, the risks increase dramatically. Closing. Right now, the war between the United States and Iran remains in its early stages. But already, its effects are being felt across global markets, regional politics, and the lives of millions of people. The next phase of this conflict could determine whether tensions cool down or spiral into a much larger confrontation. If you want to stay informed about global events and breaking geopolitical developments, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. Long-term consequences, diplomatic efforts, and global implications. As the conflict between the United States and Iran continues to unfold, the world is beginning to confront the potential long-term consequences of this war. Every decision made by leaders in Washington, Tehran, and across the region has the power to shape the Middle East and global affairs for years to come. This is not just a war of missiles and military bases. It is a war of economies, of diplomacy, of public perception, and of global stability. The immediate military objectives of the United States remain focused on neutralizing Iran's ability to project power across the region. Airstrikes have targeted command centers, missile storage facilities, and military bases, while precision-guided munitions and stealth aircraft have allowed the U.S. to strike deep into Iranian territory with minimal exposure to conventional defenses. Yet even as these operations continue, questions remain about the ultimate endgame. Officials insist that the mission is not intended to overthrow the Iranian regime, but statements calling for unconditional surrender suggest a broader ambition to weaken the country's military capabilities to the point where it can no longer threaten the United States or its allies. Analysts warn that the difference between a limited military operation and a campaign that amounts to regime destabilization is a matter of interpretation, and history shows that ambiguity can quickly lead to prolonged engagement. Iran, for its part, is demonstrating a commitment to asymmetric warfare, relying on a combination of missile strikes, drone attacks, naval harassment, and cyber operations to counter a far more technologically advanced opponent. The Iranian strategy seeks to create uncertainty and risk for American forces, while signaling to allies and adversaries alike that it remains a formidable regional power. Its use of proxy groups, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon and militia networks in Iraq and Syria, adds another layer of complexity. By empowering these groups, Iran can strike indirectly, drawing other nations into the conflict and further destabilizing the region. This strategy is proving effective in creating a tense, high-stakes environment where even minor incidents can trigger widespread escalation. The humanitarian consequences of this war are already stark, and they may worsen in the coming weeks. In southern Iran, the strike on an elementary school, which reportedly killed more than 160 people, has drawn international attention and condemnation. Families are fleeing major cities with little more than the clothes on their backs, seeking safety from a conflict that shows no immediate signs of slowing. In Lebanon, the situation is equally dire. Nearly 500,000 people have been displaced from their homes due to Israeli airstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions, and makeshift shelters have been established in stadiums, parks, and along coastal promenades. International organizations, including the United Nations, are warning that continued forced displacement could violate humanitarian laws and exacerbate an already critical situation. Regional refugee flows into neighboring countries such as Jordan, Syria, and Turkey are expected to place additional strain on governments already struggling with fragile economies and social unrest. Economically, the impact of the war is being felt not only in the Middle East but around the globe. Oil prices have surged dramatically, with U.S. crude surpassing $90 per barrel, representing the largest weekly increase since oil futures trading began in 1983. The disruption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, where nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes, poses a major risk to international markets. Airlines have already raised ticket prices in response to rising fuel costs. Shipping companies are rerouting vessels to avoid the Persian Gulf, and global supply chains face delays that could ripple across industries ranging from agriculture to technology. For the United States, the spike in gas prices has immediate implications for consumers, potentially reducing household spending and slowing economic growth at a critical moment. The administration faces mounting pressure to reassure the public and stabilize the markets while continuing military operations abroad. Diplomacy, meanwhile, remains fragile and uncertain. European leaders are urging restraint, emphasizing the importance of avoiding a regional escalation that could spiral into a wider conflict. Russia and China have expressed concern over stability and the security of shipping lanes, signaling a delicate balance in international diplomacy. Back-channel communications between U.S. and Iranian officials are reportedly ongoing, but mistrust runs deep, and both sides remain wary of appearing weak. Past negotiations have repeatedly failed, and the possibility of misunderstandings escalating into larger confrontations is ever present. As a result, the next few weeks may be decisive, with every action and statement potentially altering the trajectory of the war. As we continue to monitor developments, it is clear that this is a pivotal moment in global history. The decisions made now will reverberate across the world, affecting energy markets, regional security, humanitarian conditions, and the balance of power for years to come. The situation remains fluid, and only time will reveal the full impact of this conflict. In the meantime, civilians in the Middle East endure uncertainty and danger. Global economies respond to market fluctuations, and leaders navigate an extraordinarily complex set of challenges that will shape the next chapter in this unfolding crisis. Stay tuned for continuous coverage and in-depth analysis of the conflict, the humanitarian impact, and the global economic consequences. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to follow every development in this unprecedented international crisis.